First, let's talk about the drive shaft. Now, this is going to be our yoke that comes out of the transmission, and this is our yoke to the transfer case. So it's going to be like this, right? Well, we've got to get rid of that piece right there, and then we're going to have to take a measurement, and we're going to have to take it to a drive shaft shop and have it made up. I'm going to show you a couple different ways that you can go about taking off the yoke and disconnecting your U-joint, and then we're going to talk about how you measure it for the drive shaft shop. All right, so we've got the yoke in a vise. We've got the grease cleaned off it so we can see what we're doing. And if you look right there, that's the retaining ring, that little metal piece. We're going to knock that out, and then we should be able to start pressing the U-joint out. There's two different ways that people usually remove these. One of those ways is to take two sockets. You get a socket that's larger and put it over here, and then you get a socket that's the size of this and put it in here, and you use your vise like a press. So when you're cranking it down, this side is pushing that way into the receiving larger end of the other socket. Now that we have our two pieces out, you want to actually put them back up under the truck. We're going to do it on the table so we can see a little bit better. You want this slid in the transmission and then pull it out about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch so you have a little bit of play. If you push it in all the way, that means that this end here is going to be bottomed out all the time, and that is not good for the transmission. If you get in a situation where something moves, it's going to slam against the back and could cause problems. You always want it out just a little bit from where it was. You want to set everything where it's going to go, and when you give the drive shaft shop your measurements, you want to measure from center to center of the cap. This one's actually going to only be about 5 inches. It's going to be a little tiny drive shaft, jack shaft rather, and you want to take that measurement center to center, and when you drop off your items, you want to make sure you have all your information as well. All right, now we know our measurement. Now mine turned out to be about 5 inches because of where I placed the engine, also what type of transmission I used, and the fact that there's different length tail shafts. A little bit shorter or a little bit longer is fine as long as you can make the shaft fit and it won't bind when it's turning. You need to take all these things into account. Yours, if you're doing this same swap, may be different. Keep that in mind. You don't just walk into the drive shaft with a bunch of random pieces and say, hey, make me a drive shaft. You've got our measurement, and you also need to tell them what these pieces are for, so we can tell them, hey, this is a yoke off a Turbo 350 transmission, and this is the yoke off the input on a transfer case in a 1953 Dodge M37. They'll take that information and they'll measure for the U-joints, and they will hook you up. They will let you know what you need to make this work. So let's go ahead, get these cleaned up, get them to the drive shaft shop, and hopefully they'll be back before our next video. While we're waiting for the drive shaft to come back from the shop, we got about a 2-week lead out, unfortunately, right now because they're so busy. We're going to still keep moving on. Now, if you notice, I bolted the fenders and the grill back in place. They are not secured super tight, kind of like Walmart furniture, just a couple bolts in there hand tight until you get it all back together. We did that so we can go ahead and plan our routing. We're going to go ahead and start pulling our wires through for our engine, down to our lights, and also run our battery cables through. Let's go ahead and take a look at the battery cables. We lucked out pretty good because we were able to use the factory locations. There's already an insulator here to keep the cables from running. We just ran them out here and down through the corresponding holes in the floor. And then we come out. Now, this is where you need to do a little bit to make sure you don't have a problem in the future. Where your ground cable comes out, we're going to ground it right here on the frame. Now we've cleaned the surface off under here, bolt it tight, and then we'll make sure to spray some protector on there to keep it from corroding. Make sure it is not touching anything so it doesn't rub. Same thing for the positive cable. When securing the cable to the frame, try to use something like this, a rubber P-clamp. This wraps around it, and then you run your bolt or your self-tapping screw through here to close it. Now, this one's a little too big. You can see it doesn't pinch it, so we're going to have to go with a smaller one. But this will keep it from rubbing through onto the bare wire. Even though these cables will be secured tight, they're still going to vibrate and that'll eventually wear through the coatings, so try to keep them from moving as much as possible. So instead of just filling in these holes where other things were running through, we decided to repurpose them for our wires. So we have our separate bundles to the rear section of the truck. This section is going to the engine, and this section is your front lighting. There are already rubber grommets in place, might as well take advantage of them. Nice and neat. Well, they will be. As far as the starter button goes, from the factory you had this plunger mounted on the firewall, and when you put your foot on it, this end over here would kick the lever on the starter and turn the starter over. We don't want to use this just because it's big and bulky and we don't have that starter on that side anymore. What we are going to do is we're going to repurpose this starter momentary switch. We're going to make a panel, and we are going to actually mount it in here like this so you can hit it with your foot just like you would the original, and it'll start the truck. It looks kind of original, not really, but it also keeps this starter button out of the way because we want to make the inside look pretty much stock. We don't want a bunch of extra switches and buttons on the dash. And there you go. We cut out a piece of sheet metal the same shape, drilled the holes, used the same factory screws to hold it back in, and then you'll just hit it with your foot. Like that. Nice and easy. And it won't be too obvious. You could even get different buttons right here so it's not a black button if you'd like. We're going to hold off on the electrical for right this second, move over to the fuel plumbing, and then we're going to continue on with the electrical in a future episode. Let's go ahead and talk about the plumbing and also, just as important, the fuel sending unit. So here's the back of our M37. As you can see, they're nice enough to put an access panel. Thank you. That's awesome. Here you have two fuel lines and you have your sending unit. We already had and took the sending unit loose. We're going to pull it out and fit our other one in there. But first, I'm going to show you how to determine the resistance of one of these sending units in case you're wondering how they work. This is a pretty easy setup. As you can see, you just set your unit to ohms. Put one lead, doesn't matter which one, on the output wire, the other on the body of the unit. We just have it on the side of the shaft here. In the empty position, you can see we're reading like 0.1, 0.4 ohms. And in the full position, it's reading around 40, well, this isn't working very well, but it'll read around 40 to 60 ohms, I believe. And that's how you can tell what style sending unit you have. You can also test to see if this is bad, because as you move it slowly, see the couple times where it drops out to OL? That's open. That means that you have open in your circuit, and see how erratic it is. It's going from 17 to 30, all over the place. This fuel gauge was probably not reading very well. Another OL dropout. Good thing we're updating it. We've got our new unit that came with our gauge set. You can see this is pretty long, but luckily they make this to where you can cut it and move it to the appropriate length. We're gonna do the same thing. Got one lead on the end of our output, one lead on the body. In the empty position, we're reading, 4 or 5 ohms. It's probably supposed to read 0 when it's all the way down. And we're going to move it up slowly and watch the meter. You can see it increases way more smoothly than that old one. And then at full, we're reading around 89, 90 ohms, which is right where it should be. These sending units that come with these dolphin gauges are awesome. Look how short we can make this thing, so close to the factory length. We're going to take advantage of that, and we laid this factory one on a piece of paper, and we marked where our float was, and we marked the bottom of our unit with the leading edge against the top of the paper. So we'll take the new unit, put it into the same position, and then that's our pivot point, and you can see as long as our float lands there, it's going to be pretty close. And another cool added bonus, these bolt patterns are exactly the same. I'm not going to have to drill or modify anything to drop this in. And voila. Look how easy that was. That's going to wrap it up on this episode of the M37. I was going to continue on with the plumbing of the fuel system, but my dumb ass forgot to order the fittings I need, took the lines to the tank. They'll be here in a couple days. We'll catch you up on that in the next episode. Meanwhile, we did get some things accomplished. As you saw in a previous video, we got the heater installed. We also got our electrical run, and we've got a couple things mounted, and then we also ran our battery cables, bolted our starter in, and we showed you how to put in the fuel level sending unit, which, by the way, turned out to be way too easy. I'm actually a little worried about how easy it is. If it's custom, that means it usually doesn't bolt in. This may be the oddball that actually did that. Looks like it's going to work great. We've only got a couple weeks left before the deadline to get this thing running and driving. We're still waiting on the drive shaft to come back from the drive shaft shop, from it being modified to go between the transmission and the transfer case. In the meantime, we're going to keep moving forward. I'll be updating you on the rest of the wiring, the fuel line plumbing, and hopefully hopefully we'll be firing this thing up very soon because it's got to be at a show and we only got a couple weeks left. So we got to get our asses in gear right now. Thanks for joining me. If you have any questions, email me at greasyboycustoms@gmail.com. Till next time, we'll see you and happy hot rodding.